Hello, everyone, and welcome into a late night edition of the Fantasy Football Universe. I am Aaron St. Dennis. Find me on Twitter at FFMadScientist. The reason we're here tonight is we got a little bit of breaking news on the Rashee Rice situation. An arrest warrant was issued for him today in Dallas. And as usual, anytime any legal news breaks from Alvin Kamara to this situation, the only thing I do is I go on Twitter and I type in at Drew Davenport FF. So instead of coming on here tomorrow with the other guys and us pretending we have any idea what the law is, I just brought on the guy who has a pretty damn good idea. Practicing defense attorney of 23 years, was it, Drew? Yep, 23 years. So we're here to hear what Drew has to say. Thanks for joining me, Drew. You want to tell everyone where they can find you or, what you're up to?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate, even though this is a crazy evening, happy to carve out a little bit of time to talk about it because it does give me the chance to kind of elaborate on some of the stuff that can't go into a thread. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Drew Davenport FF. I do have a somewhat dormant TikTok that's about to come to life in May, the Fantasy Football Lawyer. And I also have my show, The Auction Brief, which will also be starting up in May as well.
Awesome. So I guess we will get right into it here. I will read. This is the briefing from NFL.com, and it says the Dallas Police Department on Wednesday issued an arrest warrant for Kansas City wide receiver Rashee Rice in regard to a serious bodily injury crash that took place March 30th on a Dallas highway. Rice, 23, is facing 8 counts, including aggravated assault, collision involving serious bodily injury, and 6 counts of collision involving injury. I had seen it was up to 8, but I thought maybe it's 8 charges and 6 of those stemming from the collision. Where do you want to start here, Drew? What do you think is the most pertinent place to begin?
Well, you're absolutely right. It is 8 charges, but
Okay.
the different counts, those are charges. But really, the way that they did it was they charged it alternatively, meaning they charged 1 count for serious bodily injury, and that's for, I'm presuming, the woman that they've talked about with the possibly fractured orbital bone, although it sounds to me like maybe it wasn't fractured. I don't know. We're going to find all that stuff out. That's part of the problem with breaking the stuff down immediately, is we don't always know that information. But it sounds like that's 1 count of it. And then they went ahead and did 6 other counts for all 6 of the cars that were involved. And so that's kind of, like I said, an alternative pleading. So even if they lose on the idea of whether or not this is serious bodily injury, they could still try to get a conviction for just causing injury, period. So that's 7 of the counts. And then, of course, the 8th count, which is, for my mind, the most troubling for him, that's the aggravated assault charge. And the aggravated assault is an interesting way to take it, but I don't think it's a terrible tactic when you have a sharp prosecutor. And I think down there they're called district attorneys, but the DA, if he's sharp, he's saying, look, this was reckless enough behavior that it falls under the aggravated assault statute. And the problem with that is, of course, that there's mandatory prison time if he's found guilty of something like that. I don't really see that happening, but I'm sure we're going to get into that in the next 15 minutes.
I know you mentioned that there were no additional drug or gun charges, and that was something you were happy to see. I know they said there was some marijuana in the car. I'm not up to date on U.S. laws. I'm in Canada. Is marijuana legal in Dallas? Is that an issue at all?
I don't know if it's legal yet, but I don't think it's an issue.
No.
And it sounds to me like they don't care about it either. And one of the things that happened, I'm in Ohio. It literally just got legalized at the last election in November. But even before then, a couple years before then, they weren't even prosecuting it because it took more money to prosecute it than it did to actually care about it. So they weren't prosecuting it. I'm guessing that's what happened here because the police did say that they found marijuana, but they didn't find anything else. There was like a check and some jewelry and the Chiefs playbook in the car. But yeah, that's part of the thing that I always caution people about is I say, look, you can't assume that these people at the scene who said, we saw him putting guns in a bag and then walking, all that stuff is just conjecture and rumor. That's nothing the police have ever said happened. They didn't charge him. So I think we can kind of put those rumors to rest about, was he intoxicated? Was there guns? Was there drugs? All that stuff seems to be a big fat negative. And the charges are what they are because they spent their time doing the due diligence to see if that stuff was involved.
I know a lot of people panicked right when they seen the the breaking news. An arrest warrant was issued for him. I read I read all of your report earlier. You said that's a lot scarier sounding than it really is. It's standard procedure in this case. Although you did mention that you were kind of surprised that they issued one, given that he had already retained counsel.
Yeah. So, and this is one of those things that's hard to explain the nuance in a thread like that. So it's good to talk about it. It is a little bit odd. So let me start there by saying, if I had a client who had already retained me and I knew charges were coming, I would just say to the prosecutor, hey, give me a heads up when the charges come down. We'll walk him or her in, and we'll get it taken care of. That's normally something that you just have a handshake. Yeah, we're going to do this. It's not a big deal. And they usually aren't going to do a warrant when they already are involved with the other legal counsel and the other party. That is a little bit weird to me. I don't know. And I was talking with somebody earlier. I don't want to name the
Yeah,
name, but somebody who's a former attorney and who I respect a lot of their opinion because he's a smart guy. He said, well, that's one little thing that popped up in his brain too, that he said, what is that about? Do we think there's some hard asses in the DA's office that may want to take a harder line with this? Because that's a bit of an odd thing. Now, putting that aside for just a moment, and I think we can't necessarily read a ton into that. We can't sit here and say, okay, well, that's odd, so we have to confer X, Y, and Z. I think that's dangerous. So until I get more proof that there is some sort of hard line they're taking here, I would just say the fact that it was issued as a warrant is not unusual, because these types of charges, specifically felony charges in general, usually do get filed on a warrant. And what I do misdemeanor work mainly. I used to do felony work more, but most of my cases are complaints. Let's for instance, something nonviolent like a theft from a Walmart. That'll be typically just, hey, here's a complaint, here's your summons, come to court. But any charge involving jail time, they have the ability to do a warrant if they want. So it's not unusual. And when you hear that in the media, they play it up like, oh, he's going to be arrested and there's this warrant out for him, and it paints this picture of a guy running from the law. That's just not the case. He probably got notified that they put the charges out, and I already heard from, I think it was Josina Anderson put it on Twitter, that they're working with authorities right now to turn him in tomorrow. He'll walk through the process. I doubt he sees the inside of the jail. If he does, it's for like an hour while the bond's processed, and then he gets back out.
yeah. I think everyone has the Cam. Was it Cam Sutton? The
Yeah.
Lions player, he's the one where everyone hears warrant and they're picturing a statewide manhunt or
Right.
countrywide manhunt. So right off the bat, they assume he's fleeing the country like OJ, but it's not the case here. It's like you said, it's all procedural.
Yeah. And Aaron, just real quick, a dirty little secret about warrants that people don't know. There are thousands, tens of thousands of outstanding warrant in any jurisdiction. Uh, these guys, they don't go driving around looking for people that have warrants. That's just something that happens when you come in contact with a government agency that sees that you have a warrant. So when they put a warrant out, it's pretty much like that's just going to hang out there unless they actively go and try to find him. Now, in this kind of case, that could be that they might do that,
Because
but
he's high
generally,
profile.
yeah, right. And they'll say, hey, we want to get this case moving or whatever. But again, warrants are out there all the time and nobody does anything with them. Just because it's a warrant doesn't mean somebody's fleeing or eluding or not wanting to turn themselves in or anything like that.
Yeah, but like you said, this is more likely a case where his lawyer's going to talk with whatever prosecutors or whatever and going to arrange for him to turn himself in. And like you said, probably be in and right back out and then just move forward with it.
Correct.
All right. I know you can't really. Well, what do you think is next? What do you expect next in the process? I know you don't know all the details. As you said, you don't know necessarily some of the codes and the complete charges. It's more of a ballpark broad strokes they've painted with. But what do you expect next?
Yeah, and that's important to mention here. So I'm glad you said that. I have not seen the complaints yet, and I'm not. A lot of times, what happens is those don't get filed until after the arraignment, after the person's actually brought into court and they plead not guilty. So there's nothing online yet that I can find. Doesn't mean I'm, you know. Let's just say this: it is very difficult sometimes to run down these cases because of the number of jurisdictions that are within any certain um, city. So, like, I'm in Dayton, Ohio. There is 12 different jurisdictions in Dayton. It's sometimes hard to run that down. However, I think I have the right court, and there's nothing been filed yet, which wouldn't be abnormal because he hasn't actually been arraigned on the charges yet. So we don't know exactly what they are. We've heard reporting about that. And something, Aaron, you and I talked about off the air before coming on was that a lot of times these reports get made by people who are not lawyers, and they say things that are sort of just kind of correct, and they're not exactly correct. And if they're not paying attention to exactly the verbiage they're supposed to be using, that signals to me what charge it is or what section I should be going to, then I'll be led a little bit astray on that. But I think we're in the neighborhood here, and I think, excuse me, I think we're correct in what the charges are. So what he'll do is he'll walk in, pay a bond, or get OR'd, which means released with no bond on his own recognizance. That's his promise to a future court dates. And then a felony case, a lot of times, takes a little bit longer than a misdemeanor. In fact, it takes sometimes can take a lot longer. We saw that with the Camara case.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I see that happening here, just because he's already been out in front of this so much. The way that his attorney and him are acting, they're acting as like, hey, we want to get this over with as quick as possible. We want to get this behind us. So I think we're going to have plenty of time before the NFL season for clarity on this. However, it's possible that doesn't happen. We'll see how complicated it gets. But I don't think this case is nearly as complicated as the Camara case. And I think that I would see something happening here in the next couple months. And so the next thing up really is for him to plead not guilty. They'll set a court date where they have a pretrial, like a status conference, where they talk about what they're going to do with the case. Is there an offer? Is there a discussion of sentencing? Do we know what restitution's owed? That kind of stuff. They'll start talking about those issues in the case and see whether or not there is common ground they can meet on. And if there isn't, then it gets set for a trial.
I'm glad you mentioned that, though, because like you said, it seems to be a different situation, obviously different charges than Camara, but we discussed whether or not his approach to, was it an Instagram post he made, basically, admitting that he was there, which was, I thought, a poor strategy. And, I thought maybe he hadn't retained legal counsel, but obviously, like you had mentioned, it's possible that they figured they were going to be found out anyway. So get out in front of it, cooperate. And like you said, hopefully that speeds it along.
Yeah.
I guess, what do you think? I know it's going to be tough to predict. I see in your post here on page 17, it looks like you think it's more plausible 1 to 2 games is what he ends up with. What do you think? Obviously, I would assume you're thinking jail time's a long shot based on the limited postings you do have. This is more of a financial restitution, sit out a couple of games situation, you think?
Yeah, I think so. And this is all based on just the charges and knowing what we know that's open source public information. There may be some things we don't know, but I think we know enough to start making some guesses. And I want to stress that these are educated guesses based on my legal experience, but that doesn't mean they're going to be absolutely correct. I got called out on the carpet about that earlier on Twitter. Somebody saying that I had been wrong about this or that. And I said, I'm not here to tell you I'm perfect. I'm here to read it as best I can with what I know, and I'm not always going to be correct. So the thing that bothers me about people saying, oh, it's going to be 4 to 6 games is we can look back at some precedent in recent memory. One is Deshaun Watson, who had like 25 different allegations against him. He got 11 games. Then we have Alvin Kamara involved in an incident that was pretty heinous. And if anybody saw that video and then saw the resulting pictures of what happened there, that was pretty heinous stuff. He gets 3 games. I'm not here to say that Goodell's not going to give him 4. Like, I'm not saying that's crazy. I'm just saying I don't think that's going to happen. I think that right now we have nothing else to chew on, and we're all just going nuts about this case. And I understand that because there really isn't anything going on except the draft in a couple weeks. So we're really focused on this. But come July, this is going to seem like a blip. So I would guess that if he handles this quickly and correctly, that he's going and they've done everything that I believe is the way that you should do it in these situations. Because one of the things that Roger Goodell puts a premium on is having actual remorse and also owning your behavior. So it's not just about like going out there and saying, I'm sorry if somebody was hurt, because that's not an apology. It's, I'm really sorry about what I did. I'm trying to make it right. And that's what the tactic they've taken since the beginning. We're contacting the other parties. We're seeing what they need. We're seeing how we can make them whole. All that stuff's going to be really important to the league. On top of that, that does matter to the district attorney. If you come in there and you file 17 motions and you say he wasn't in the car and blah, 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 but they got cell phone video and a traffic camera of you driving, then the district attorney rolls their eyes and says, yeah, take the charge, buddy. But if you come in there with the right tactic, now I'm not saying that's always right, because you got to feel these cases out case by case.
Yep.
And that's why in my practice, when people come to me, they'll say, well, so-and-so got this. That's what I should get. I said, nah, every single case is different. And you just have to know how to play it. Sometimes you come in as a hard ass. Sometimes you come in with the soft sell. And you say, look, all these things my fantastic, wonderful client is doing. And you hope that they have some, some compassion for that. And I will say this about Rice, a lot of people said, well, he was intoxicated. He had to be intoxicated. That's why he left the scene. I said, there's a lot of room to just think to yourself, you could freak out in that spot. You don't have to be intoxicated just because you left the scene.
Yep.
It's okay to just make them a human and say, okay, you're 22, you're racing this car, you cause an accident, you jump out and you go, oh my God, what did I do? I got weed in the car. And you just leave and you just freak out. Like, it's okay to believe that. We don't have to believe the worst of people. Furthermore, we don't have to litigate that issue because it's not there. There's no issue there.
Yeah.
So
that seems to be the issue for me, is you see some of the bigger clickbait Twitter sites there saying, oh my God, an arrest warrant issued and he could be up to 2 years and blah, blah, blah. So you see everyone panic selling Rashee Rice today. Meanwhile, realistically, this is probably going to be a financial restitution, some form of probation, maybe, maybe a counseling or whatever. And a couple of games, it would be where I lean. Obviously, I'm no legal expert. It's just how it feels to me. So I think it's kind of a case of let's not overreact to warrant issued and let's, just play it out here. Because like you said, the Alvin Kamara was far worse and he didn't really cooperate. And he got, what'd you say it was 3 games?
He got 3.
So I can't see it being worse than that.
Yeah. And look, I could understand Goodell if he says, I'm going to make an example out of him or something, and he says 4. I guess I could see that happening, but I just don't. It doesn't. None of the evidence points to that. And one of the more frustrating things about what I do is that because I'm a legal expert, people think, oh well, he's an NFL punishment expert, and I'm not. I don't claim to be in the mind of Roger Goodell. So I could break this down legally for you and say that I think he's probably going to end up with a couple misdemeanors, restitution, maybe a suspended license, a big fine, stuff like that. I still think that's where we're headed, despite the aggravated assault charge. I doubt he sees the inside of a jail, and I think the NFL comes at him for 1 or 2 games. And, by the middle of September, nobody's talking about it anymore.
Anything else you think we forgot that you need to add in here before we wrap her up?
No, just that that you have to keep in mind that I get, as a defense attorney, I get a discovery packet that's got everything in it that the police have against you. We ain't going to get that. And so there's going to be a lot of facts that we don't know, that we're not aware of. And those are going to affect the outcome of the case. And I would say this, I reserve the right to change my opinion with any bad facts that come out. And people often say, oh, well, you said this before. And I say, look, don't you want somebody that flows with the information? And that's what I do. I'm always just going to flow with any new information. So keep that in mind. Just stay tuned. And I'm obviously going to always have something for you as soon as any news breaks.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This is just based on what the current info is right now. You find out tomorrow that they issued a warrant and he fled the country. It's a completely different outlook we're looking at here. So things change quickly. So don't, it's not set in stone here. So, all right, Drew, thanks for joining me. I know you had a family event planned here, a family survivor night. You want to take one more shot here? Tell everyone where they can find you. And like I said, on Twitter, at Drew Davenport FF. All legal situations. I have notifications on right for Drew. You were the first person I turned to when I seen this Rashee Rice. So where else can they find you? What are you up to?
Thanks, man. I appreciate you saying that. It's always nice to hear, because there are a lot of trolls out there that want to tear you down. So hearing the positive reinforcement, I really appreciate that. But yeah, the best thing to do is stay up on my Twitter account. I'm getting the TikTok going in the next week. That's Fantasy Football Lawyer. But also my show through the summer is a great way for information on all this stuff as well. That's the Auction Brief, and that's anywhere you can find podcasts. I have some of the biggest names in the industry on the show, and we talk about legal stuff, auction stuff, fantasy, football in general. We hit it all. So check out the Auction Brief.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Drew, for joining me. That is a wrap on our special edition here of the Fantasy Football Universe. Head over to fantasyfootballuniverse.com to check us out, and check back tomorrow. I believe we're doing a trade show. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Take care and have a great night. Thank you again, Drew.
Thanks, Aaron.